Stand in front of the Colosseum today and you'll see something strange. From one angle, it looks complete. A massive stone wall, rising several stories high, arches stacked on top of arches, reaching toward the sky like it did 2,000 years ago. It looks powerful, permanent, like it could stand for another 2,000 years without breaking a sweat. But walk around to the other side and the whole thing changes. Half the outer wall is just gone. Empty space where there should be stone. You can see straight through to the inner corridors, the exposed hallways, the skeleton of the building laid bare. It looks like someone took a bite out of a massive stone donut and forgot to finish eating it. Everyone who visits asks the same question. What happened to the other half? And the answers you get are usually vague. Time, weather, natural decay, the kinds of things people say when they don't really know. But the real story is much stranger, because the Colosseum didn't slowly crumble over centuries. Half of it fell in a single day, and what happened after that explains why modern Rome looks the way it does today. To understand what went wrong, you have to know what the Colosseum was when it was whole. Construction started in 70 AD and took only 8 years, which even by modern standards is incredibly fast for something this massive. Thousands of workers hauled enormous blocks of white limestone to the site every day. The finished building wasn't the weathered grey stone you see in photos. It was covered in bright white stone that gleamed in the sun so intensely it could blind people walking past. The outer walls were held together without any cement or mortar. Workers just stacked the heavy blocks on top of each other, relying on perfect edges and sheer weight to keep everything in place. But to make sure the structure didn't shift or collapse, they used a hidden system. Inside each stone block, workers carved special grooves and inserted heavy iron clamps. These metal connectors stitched the entire building together from the inside, creating an invisible skeleton that held everything rigid. It took about 300 tons of iron to do this, and centuries later, people would tear the building apart, hunting for every last piece of that metal. Inside, the Colosseum was even more impressive. Marble covered the seats where wealthy Romans sat. Statues of gods stood in every arch. On hot days, workers stretched a massive fabric dome over the crowd to give 50,000 spectators shade from the brutal Italian sun. The Romans built the Colosseum to last forever, a monument so strong that time itself couldn't touch it. But they made one mistake, and it was buried in the ground beneath them. When Roman engineers chose where to build, they picked a spot in the center of the city that seemed perfect, flat, open, easy to access. What they didn't realize was that the ground under their feet wasn't the same everywhere. The northern section of the building sits on solid bedrock, dense limestone that had been there for millions of years, hard as concrete, completely stable. That part of the foundation was essentially indestructible. To compensate, on the surface, it looked to compensate. On the surface, it looked fine, but underneath, the soil was different, softer, more like a sponge than a rock. So this massive structure, weighing hundreds of thousands of tons, was essentially split in half. One side resting on stone, the other side resting on what used to be a lakebed. For a while, it didn't matter. The building stood strong. Spectators filled the seats. Gladiators fought on the sand. The Colosseum became the heart of Rome, hosting games and executions and mock naval battles where they actually flooded the arena floor. But every time an earthquake hit, something strange happened. The northern side, anchored to bedrock, barely moved. The southern side, sitting on softer ground, would shake and vibrate and shift just slightly. Not enough to notice right away, just enough to stress the stone. To create tiny cracks that grew wider with every tremor. The building was tearing itself apart from the foundation up, and nobody could see it happening. The first serious damage came in the 5th century, when a powerful earthquake rocked the city. Cracks appeared in the southern wall. Parts of the structure started to sag. Officials tried to patch the damage, filling gaps with brick and reinforcing weak sections, but the underlying problem was still there. One half of the building wanted to stay put. The other half wanted to sink. For hundreds of years, the Colosseum existed in this fragile state. Sometimes it was maintained, Sometimes it was ignored. After the fall of the Roman Empire, nobody was organizing games anymore. The building sat empty. Vegetation started growing in the cracks. Trees took root in the upper levels. And then, in September of 1349, disaster struck. A massive earthquake hit Italy. The ground shook for days. Buildings across Rome collapsed into piles of rubble, and the southern outer wall of the Colosseum, already weakened by centuries of stress, finally gave up. Thousands of tons of white stone crashed to the ground in an instant. The noise must have been deafening. Dust clouds filled the air. When everything settled, the perfect oval ring of the Colosseum was broken. Half the outer wall was just gone, leaving a gaping wound that exposed the inner corridors and chambers. That single event changed everything, because once the stones were on the ground, they stopped being part of a monument. They became something else entirely. Free building materials. If you had walked through Rome in the years after the earthquake, you would have seen something that looked like a quarry operation. The area around the collapsed wall turned into what people called a stone forest. Massive limestone blocks lying everywhere, some still perfectly intact, just waiting to be picked up and hauled away. And that's exactly what happened. But it wasn't vandalism. It wasn't thieves sneaking in at night. It was completely legal. The city government issued official contracts allowing builders to take stone from the Colosseum. In exchange for hauling away the blocks, contractors would either pay a fee or provide services to the city. It was a regulated system. Every stone was counted. Routes were planned. Teams of oxen pulled carts loaded with ancient Roman blocks through the streets, delivering them to new construction sites across the city. The Colosseum became a building supply warehouse, and the best part, from the builder's perspective, was the quality. Roman limestone was incredibly dense and durable, better than anything you could quarry fresh. Buildings made from Colosseum stone would last for centuries. So Rome harvested its greatest monument and used it to build new palaces, new churches, new bridges. The stone didn't disappear. It just moved. One of the most famous examples is the Palazzo Venezia, the massive palace in central Rome. Almost the entire structure, from the foundation to the outer walls to the interior supports, was built using stone taken directly from the Colosseum. When you look at its imposing facade today, you're essentially looking at the missing southern wall, just rearranged into a different shape. The same thing happened with the Palazzo Barberini. One Roman family, with official permission from the Pope, hauled away enough material to build an entire city block. There was even a saying at the time about how what invaders couldn't destroy, the Barberini family dismantled piece by piece. But the stones traveled even farther. Huge blocks of Colosseum limestone were used in the construction of St. Peter's Basilica, the most important church in the Catholic world. Workers had to build temporary bridges and reinforce roads just to transport the massive stones across the city. Even the Ponte Cestio, a bridge thousands of people cross every day, has pieces of the Colosseum hidden in its foundation, buried under layers of later construction. The process wasn't always careful. Large blocks went to major projects, but smaller pieces, decorative elements, the intricate marble carvings, those met a different fate entirely. Along the roads leading away from the Colosseum, workers set up lime kilns. They would throw beautiful marble statues, ornate column capitals, carved panels into these ovens and burn them down to produce lime for making mortar. Priceless art was reduced to powder and mixed into cement for ordinary brick buildings. That's why when you look inside the Colosseum today, all you see is rough concrete and exposed brick. Everything valuable, everything beautiful, was either built into new structures or burned in kilns centuries ago. The Colosseum didn't vanish. Rome absorbed it. The city literally grew out of the ruins of its greatest symbol. But before Rome started harvesting the stone, something even stranger happened. People started living inside it. After the southern wall collapsed, the Colosseum stopped being a government building and became essentially abandoned property. And abandoned property in a crowded medieval city doesn't stay empty for long. Families moved into the empty archways. They built wooden floors inside the tall corridors, dividing single arches into 2 or 3 stories. The ground floor might be a blacksmith's shop or a shoemaker's workshop. The upper levels became living quarters. Smoke from cooking fires drifted out through gaps in the ancient stone. The arena floor, where gladiators once fought, was buried under dirt and turned into a massive community garden. Residents grew vegetables and fruit, using the towering walls as windbreaks. What used to be the deadliest floor in Rome became farmland. Wealthy families claimed entire sections of the building and rented them out like apartment complexes. Archives from the time mention these spaces being bought and sold like real estate. Inside the arches, people set up stables for horses, storage for goods, even small churches for worship. The Colosseum turned into a neighborhood, a vertical village built inside the skeleton of the ancient world's greatest arena. This informal occupation wasn't good for the structure. Residents punched new doorways and windows through the walls wherever they needed them, weakening the stone. They used marble slabs from the old seating areas as countertops and floor tiles. Ancient architecture was stripped and repurposed for everyday life. In the 11th century, one powerful Roman family even turned part of the Colosseum into a personal fortress, bricking up archways to create defensive walls. Later, when political power shifted, new rulers decided the building was more valuable as a source of construction material than as living space. That's when the official dismantling began in earnest. But stone wasn't the only thing people wanted. The real treasure was hidden inside the walls. Remember those 300 tons of iron clamps holding the blocks together? In medieval and Renaissance Rome, iron was expensive, and there was a fortune in metal sitting inside the Colosseum's walls, just waiting to be extracted. People started deliberately drilling into the stone to pull out the iron connectors. If you look closely at the Colosseum today, you'll see it's covered in thousands of small holes. Most people assume those are bullet holes or damage from war. They're not. They're extraction marks. Each hole represents someone with a drill, patiently boring into ancient stone to reach the iron inside. Once they found a clamp, they'd pry it out and take it to a forge to be melted down and turned into horseshoes, tools, weapons, whatever sold well. It was dangerous work. Sometimes the drilling would crack a block and cause it to fall, injuring or killing the person working on it. But the money was good enough that people kept doing it anyway. And every piece of iron they removed made the building weaker. The invisible skeleton that had held everything together for over 1,000 years was being stripped out, piece by piece. The Colosseum was literally losing its bones. Without those metal connectors, the stone blocks started shifting under their own weight. The structure began to sag and crack in new places. The damage that earthquakes started, iron hunters finished. All of this harvesting and dismantling continued for centuries. By the 1500s, the Colosseum was being treated like a garbage dump. Trees and rare plants grew wild inside it, creating their own ecosystem that botanists studied like it was a separate world. Locals threw trash into the abandoned corridors, and then something unexpected saved what was left. Pope Benedict XIV stepped in with a clever solution. To stop people from tearing the building apart, he declared the Colosseum a sacred site, a place where early Christians had been martyred. Modern historians note, there isn't strong evidence that mass Christian executions actually happened in the Colosseum specifically, but the designation worked. Overnight, the building transformed from a free quarry into a religious shrine. Crosses were mounted on the walls. Stealing stone from it was now considered desecrating holy ground. For the first time in history, the Colosseum was protected not because of its beauty or historical importance, but because people feared divine punishment for damaging it. That religious shield is the reason we can still see even half the structure today. Without it, the last stones would have been carted off decades ago to become someone's garden wall. Today, the Colosseum is the most valuable piece of real estate in Italy, generating billions in tourism revenue. It turned out that even half destroyed, it's worth more than any modern building. The mystery of the missing half is solved. It was eaten by necessity, ambition, and bad geology. But the imperfection, the ragged edges, the exposed inner corridors, that's what makes it recognizable. If it had survived intact, it might look like just another oval stadium. In its current form, it tells a story. We see the consequences of building on the wrong ground. We see what happens when a city needs materials more than it needs monuments. We see layers of history, from Roman engineering to medieval housing, to Renaissance, harvesting to modern preservation. The missing half didn't disappear. You can visit it. It's in the stones of St. Peter's Basilica. It's in the bridges you cross over the Tiber. It's in the walls of palaces and the foundations of houses. Rome didn't destroy the Colosseum. Rome became the Colosseum. And that asymmetry, that broken circle, that wound in the stone, is exactly what keeps people coming back to look at it. We don't mourn what's gone. We marvel at what survived.